Well, good morning if you're on the West Coast, and good afternoon for our East Coast listeners. This is Father George Williams, chaplain at San Quentin State Prison, representing the Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition, and this is our webinar for the holidays. So first of all, blessed Advent to all, and our wishes for a Merry Christmas and a blessed New Year. As you know, in this work, this is both a joyful time and yet also a very poignant and difficult time for people in prison. Today we're blessed to have two California chaplains with us. One recently retired, Deacon Bill Goeke from New Folsom Prison, also known as CSP Sacramento. He just retired a few months ago, but he'd been there a number of years. And also Rosa Guembe, who works at the Central California Women's Facility, which also includes California's death row for women. She's been there about 11 years now. And they're going to speak about working with prisoners over the holidays. What are some things that work from their experience, things to look out for, in ways that hopefully will help you in your ministry this time of year, because as you know, it's definitely a loaded time emotionally. So I'm going to start with Bill. And Bill, if you would kind of give us an overview of your work and some of your ideas.
Sure. Thank you, Father. As Father said, I worked in the adult system here primarily, mostly at CSP Sacramento. But when I started, I actually had introduction to the adult system. I was in a more rural prison, actually way up in the northeast corner, Susanville area. And I happened to arrive early in December that year to begin the ministry. And one of the first things I was informed of was that there were thousands of holiday cards that needed to be passed out. This had been arranged for already. So I was glad to have a couple of volunteers, including the previous chaplain, and we started sorting them. We had some inmates helping us getting them paired up, making sure everything was going to be exactly equal. And then we started passing these out. And so that took a while, but it kind of gave me a sense of at least something that the holidays would be about. The inmates didn't have to request them. And, you know, we'd offer them to everyone. Only a few people turned them down. A lot of people wanted stamps or something else along with it. But, of course, that's one drawback to that kind of thing, is that we're just handing things out and there's not a whole lot of time to talk to people along the way. So we just have to take notes on who we were going to get back to. And then a few weeks later, towards the end of December, we got to provide the seasonal liturgies. And that was basically the first Christmas holiday season I experienced for the adult system. And in the future seasons, we went on to having banquets and special holiday events. Of course, there were always the other religious groups that needed something to go on, and we would help with that, supporting what individuals or other groups wanted, whether closely related to our faith or someone else's. And that was mostly the experience at the maximum security institution. Not a lot of events, but we were able to have some particular holiday events. And there's probably other people that dealt with women too. I was just dealing with men. Earlier in my career, I'd been with working with the youth. And we had some special management units, but we did not have a death row up there. And also my longest experience at CSP Sacramento, fewer inmates, but more mental health concerns. So that brought about a little bit difference in the inmate ministry. And probably the biggest thing that I would look at, looking back now, is that sometimes it's easy to forget that these inmates have a lot of the same needs in the holidays as any free person. I think we can all have our discouragements during the holidays. Whether or not a relative has died, we can kind of be going through a little bit of bereavement for whatever's lost in our lives. And with inmates especially, not just like losing one person, they've lost a lot of people in their lives just by being separated from them. So I think that kind of thing comes up, just dealing with the fact that they're in a bit of bereavement all the time, and in the holidays it can be more difficult. The more chaplains and volunteers we can have ready to deal with that, just making that extra time, I think it really helped. If we didn't have too much on the plate that we couldn't spend the extra, bit of time that an individual needed. So whether it was a new loss or an old loss. And of course, like any free person, they want to be able to communicate. So those Christmas cards helped. They wanted to be able to, have someone listen to them, share their challenges with them, whatever was going on. Maybe some more lockdowns. Some of the prisons end up having more lockdowns during that time of year for whatever reason. And, maybe growing up, they were used to having some kind of, holiday special treats or reading materials, new calendars, the big thing that we found the guys would appreciate getting those calendars started early in the year. And of course, a lot of things hard to deliver. Sometimes there were special donations of hygiene kits or things, and it got to be ready with the time to get things out if we've signed up to provide something to the guys. And then, it helped to have volunteers, as always, very, very valuable, so that, we wouldn't lose out on some opportunities that, you get very far into January and people aren't really interested in Christmas cards or the calendars maybe a little bit longer. And getting back to that sense of loss, that bereavement, I think on the webinar that we have on this site earlier this year goes into that, where you may not see outright grief going on. It might not have been a recent loss, but as for anyone, you get through the holidays and you start thinking about someone that this is the first time, or you're missing someone that's not available during that holiday. So whatever we can do to help handle that loss, where they want someone to talk about, sit quietly. Of course, if it is a new loss, we make time with the notification to make sure they can get on the phone and talk to family. And something, especially during this time of year, but with most grief, we try and make time for them, especially if there's a funeral coming up, for them to be able to write a eulogy or share something directly with the family. And the inmates, they'll remember that. They'll remember that as something good that's happening, and that kind of gets them through that time. I think for us, it meant a little more connection that they would have, rather than getting sullen and kind of getting into their own problems, where something might fester into more violence. We were getting them to open up and share what was going on. So it gets through the difficult times, which holidays obviously can be. Takes a lot of planning. Obviously, this isn't the time of year where you can all of a sudden say you've got a bunch of Christmas cards coming. So a lot of the special events, or if they want to sign up for Angel Tree or something like that, all that stuff's happening over the summer. So, by this time of year, hopefully it goes smoothly, and just helping things to happen if we have done all the planning ahead of time. So
say something about Angel Tree. I mean, most of our viewers are probably aware of it, but
okay, yeah. Well, Angel Tree, where an inmate can sign up to have gifts sent to their family. Children, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just one address, but that's provided a lot of Prison Fellowship, I think, is the one that sponsors that type of program mainly, and they'll provide the material, have inmates sign up, but it's a real strict process. They need that information very early. So over the summertime, when the materials come out, we really need to help get them to inmates and get them in by deadlines, because Angel Tree does all that arranging to make sure families are going to get these gifts that are donated to be sent on behalf of the inmates. So we appreciate that process. So.
Good. Okay, Bill, hold on just a sec. For our listeners, it is Prison Fellowship is the sponsor of Angel Tree. The deadline is somewhere around August, I think, for getting the forms in. So I would recommend, if for next year, it's too late for this year, but go to the Prison Fellowship website, look up Angel Tree, just Google Angel Tree program. And they'll send you all the information you need, including videos for helping the chaplains set up the program if you don't already do it. And it's an ecumenical service. It's Christian faith-based, but everybody is welcome to participate in it, whether they're inmates or Christian or not. And it's a wonderful program they've been doing for about 20 or 25 years. But the key thing, as you're saying, is preparing ahead of time and making sure that you get the applications to the prisoners and then filled out back by the early summer.
Right. Yeah, and maybe just to, continue with that thought of planning ahead, whether it's you're going to have a banquet or the bishop's coming in, or, going to have a special mass, or any kind of special event, the early planning, really over the summertime, because by early fall, that stuff needs to be on the books, the clearances going on and things like that. So not to stress out too much if we haven't gotten everything planned. I mean, just looking at the Gospels, you see all the stuff that wasn't planned at that first Christmas, whether it's the Magi getting a little bit lost on the way, or those shepherds, they didn't have much for gifts. So we don't, we can encourage inmates that what they have is probably enough. And, and then the Holy Family, they, the best example of adapting to, maybe the worst situation for what you would want, an original, your first child coming into. So, whatever we can do in the prison, I think to emulate the Gospels, I think that helps. And not to forget about the staff. I've had some of my volunteers that make a special effort to bake some cookies and get permission to pass out treats to the staff on their way in during the weeks over the holidays. And just planning the extra time, maybe that we don't always make, to speak with the staff, find out if something's going on for them. There's probably new staff that are having to do more shifts during that time of year, while the more experienced staff get the time off. So, if we can be there, I think they start to understand that we have an empathy for any situation. And then, during the year, they know they can call on us when they need to de-escalate a problem, maybe with an inmate, because they know we have an open ear to them. So
yeah, that's a good point, Bill, especially about Christmas with the staff, because again, many of them have to work over the holidays, and they're not the senior people, so they're sort of stuck there, and they're away from their families as well. What I do every year is I order a few hundred booklets from Desert Waters, which is a correctional ministry in Colorado. And I have my inmate workers wrap them up, and then I give them to the various correction officers that I run into during the holiday week. And just something small like that goes a long way in terms of developing a good relationship with staff and helping them know that they're recognized and appreciated as well, because they often don't feel that either. So Rosa, I'd like to hear some of your ideas too for what we do around the holidays.
Well, as I was thinking about, how I have celebrated in the past, the last few years, I find a great difference between ministering to men, as when I was in Corcoran with the men, as opposed as ministering to the women at the Central California Women's Facility, because there are several differences that are kind of important, and that kind of dictate the way we minister to them. The men, as many of you know, are housed by levels of security. And so my experience with levels 3 and levels 4 was that I had to do a lot of, they get a lot of lockdowns sometimes. There are conflicts, especially during the holidays, because those men are housed by themselves or with another person, another inmate, and sometimes that can be very difficult. They spend a lot of hours inside the cells, and so for those men going through the tears, like Bill said, passing Christmas cards, reading materials has been very, very important. In the same way, for men and women who are in the infirmary, also those that are in ATSEC, and also those who are in the SHU. Very, very important to go through the cells, giving them just to hold in their hands a Christmas card is really meaningful to them. And so now the women, on the other hand, and also the men who are in levels 1 and 2, who live in large dorms, they have a lot of common activities. And the women's prison, the levels of security are all mixed. So they live in dorms of about 6 to 8 women. And if they get along with each other, they do a lot of good activities among themselves, like reading the scripture, cooking, doing, celebrating the holidays. So it is very, very different. One thing that I see, because there is much less physical violence at the women's institution, the women are allowed to do and to participate in many, many more activities, both in the chapels and also in their housing units, in their cells as well, their dorms. And one of the things that they are allowed to do is decorate. They even do a context about in different buildings and how they decorate their cells and the rooms and the common areas. And then the warden and the VIPs of the prison go around and they give prizes. And so there is a lot of cooperation and activities going on by doing just that. Then there is a community choir, and also, we Catholics also, we have our own musical activities and choir practices for services, for Mass. And that creates a lot of good spirit. The community choir, that is the official institutional choir, does go through the different yards singing Christmas carols. And so that creates a lot of good spirit as well. And what they call it, IAC, the Inmate Advisory Council, they also organize a number of activities. They show movies with meaning in the gym and all kinds of activities. Some of them, there's a lot of cooking going on. I know there's a lot of cooking in the small cells also, but with the women, it's kind of much more in the open and share meals with each other. That's also very, very common. And kind of comparing back and forth, it seemed to me that the men are much more, they keep it to themselves, if they feel homesick. Because one of the things, I was talking to the women about how they feel about the holidays, and they all said how loneliness is the greatest, deepest, and hardest feeling to deal with. And it's the same way for the men. The only difference is that the men, they really, in my experience, in generalizing, they try to suck it up and they don't say anything, but they do miss their families as much as everybody else. And in fact, many of the men, they seem to miss their mothers a lot. The women, on the other hand, they express their need for, the men, sometimes they kind of sleep through the day, they are depressed, or they just tough it up. The women, they express their feelings much more. They are open to cry, and nobody makes fun of them if they cry. And they express how they miss someone who has passed away, or they share pictures from family, especially now that many of them have the little tablets. They are able to receive pictures from their families, many of them, and that's very, very helpful. Even emails from their families, that becomes very, very helpful. And so I found that the men, they really appreciate Christmas cards, and so the women as well. But for the men, many of them, they sometimes found hard to connect with their family, especially when they have really burned a lot of bridges with some members of the family. And sometimes they didn't know how to approach, how to reconnect. And the Christmas card that is, they don't have much to write, was a very good vehicle to, do initiation of connecting with their families as well. And receiving Christmas card was, really great for them. They, put them all over the cells and create the environment. And so that's a great way. I also noticed that, especially for those who are in isolation, the infirmary or ATSEG and so forth, good reading makes a big difference to them. They do read it, they do find meaning, and I have a lot, some of them have shared with me lots of stories among the men how those readings, they really help them through the holidays and through tough times. And I'm just thinking of anything else that, of course, for the Catholic community, especially now that I'm working with the women, all the events and the liturgical time are very meaningful, and they like to participate, and that's also a way by which they feel they invite other women to join us. And so we had celebrations, for instance, of Our Lady Guadalupe, practicing for the songs, preparing the celebration, decorating the chapel. All of that creates a great sense of community, and they really, and the liturgy is so conducive to that. They share the stories. Women are very open to share their stories when they, pray with their families and celebrations that they had at home and everything. And also, like the time of Advent, the same thing. One of the things that I've been doing lately, that I started with the occasion of All Saints, was to show some movies of saints. And they really took off, they really wanted to know more about more saints. And it has become a little bit like a community building and inspiring time to watch movies of saints on Saturday afternoon. And more women want to be there, and they, in fact, I was planning to do it only during the month of November with commemorating the saints. And, we still have a few more weeks to go because they wanted to continue. So that really creates a good sense of being with others and also being inspired. And that's something that they really enjoy. Also, there are women who do make the point to spend time with others, like there are women who are allowed to visit the ones that are in the infirmary, and they spend time with them, and they bring goodies to them, and they cook for them. And so that's something that they do feel that it's a time to give back. And so they do try to do something for others. They do try to listen to each other. I noticed with the men that many of them, they have friends, or they were close to someone. They had the freedom to talk to each other and share, what was going on in their lives. But I think the women are more open to, when they see someone that is in trouble, to go and spend time and ask questions and get involved and bring them to the circle, And so a number of women are really planning and doing, make a conscious decision to look out for those who are lonely, or those who might be behaving in a different way, and they bring them, to activities that they organize in the chapel, but also in their own housing units. Just thinking about anything else that. So yes, we also are planning on doing some posadas, and we are, and here at the women's prison, we do get fresh Christmas trees from some donors. And so the women love to decorate those Christmas trees. Sometimes they make the decorations themselves, and they love that. We do have a community meal, and so that's also a time. The community meals that we have twice a year, but especially the one here at Christmas time, is always more joyful, and there's a lot of Christmas caroling. But also the women like to share about what was like to celebrate Christmas in their own culture, in their own family, because we come from such a diverse place. In my experience working at a men's institution, apart from the women who are on death row, in the men's institution, I do see that men were transferred to other institutions like every 3-4 years. It was constantly coming, new people going. Well, here at the women's prisons, since there are only 3 women prisons in California, these women live, some of these women have been literally like 29 years since the time the institution was open. And so they know each other, they know what works, what doesn't work, they tell us what to do. They really own the place, you know. So they, you know, they have a lot of traditions. They tell us, you know, this is the way we do here, things in here, this is what works, this is what doesn't work. And so it's quite helpful. In that, that kind of sense is very strong among the women who are on death row. There are 20 women and they are confined to a small space. And they do have their own ability to do, you know, do exercise or watch TV, or they have a phone just for their own. And so they do make phone calls and so forth. But they do have a great way to celebrate any celebration, you know, that they do arts and crafts for their children or grandchildren. They share meals, they prepare, they decorate in great lengths, actually. And so they do wonderful, wonderful things. And as Bill mentioned, I think this is a great time to bring visitors because oftentimes both men and the women, they used to say to me, you know, many of them don't receive visits. Most of them don't receive visits. So when visitors come, they feel that people care for them, and they feel honored, and they feel you know, valuable. They feel that people care, and they appreciate it at great length. You know, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's sometimes, you know, we have done some little Christmas plays that, you know, with all the preparation that goes to that also creates a sense of community and celebration. I think that's basically what I have been involved with.
Great, Rosa, thank you. I just want to respond to a couple things that both of you have mentioned. And that is, but first I don't want to forget to mention that Dismas Ministries has a booklet, a book called Keeping Hope. And they have a project this year called Keeping Hope at the Holidays. So if you go to our CPMC website, Catholic Prison Ministries, .org, and if you go to resources and then to media and select books, it'll take you to where you can find out and order copies of Keeping Hope, because what that has in particular that I think is helpful is working with both prisoners and with families of prisoners. And this time of year, of course, you know, families are very much in people's minds, especially as they're separated from one another. So again, if you check out Dismas Ministries, you can access them directly to their website by Googling them, or go to the CPMC website and look under resources, find a copy of Keeping Hope. You know, you both mentioned the importance of encouraging activities that bring people together. I've always noticed over the years, I've only really worked with men, but there's a tendency for them to want to isolate, to withdraw, to kind of pull the covers over their heads and sleep through the holiday. And I think a lot of what we want to do is we can't force them not to do that, but we can at least give them the alternative of not doing that. And so don't be afraid of encouraging celebrations of the holidays. I think a lot of times you'll get people saying, well, it's better not to do anything, just forget about it. And my experience in 26 years is, no, that's not true. It's better to offer people the opportunity to celebrate the holidays. It's better to have a Christmas tree in the chapel if it's allowed than not. All these little things really go a long way to make taking some of the sting out of the loneliness of the holiday. And certainly the issue around bereavement and triggers, for a lot of the men and the women who work in prison, who live in prison, yeah, they've experienced the holidays like anyone else. They're fraught. I mean, sometimes they're good memories, sometimes they're horrible memories. And often the anniversaries of really important parts of their lives happen around holidays, and this time of year just brings all that up. So to be sensitive to that, to realize that they're carrying both happy and sad ideas, memories during this time is important. But I think the key thing is to focus on positive community building things that we can do. And I was amused that you were talking about the decoration. this year on death row, at least in a part of it where the men have a little more freedom than the other death row prisoners, they went all out and they decorated. They made a Christmas tree out of paper. They have colored paper chains, and even one guy even did the whole Charlie Brown Christmas thing with characters from that annual cartoon they show. It's really creative, and I think whenever something like that is allowed, encourage it, because it really helps change the atmosphere of the place and makes it more humane. So going back to any of our listeners, by the way, if you have any questions or suggestions, you can type them on Q&A at the bottom of your screen or chat, and we can respond to them. But I want to go back to Bill and see if there's anything you wanted to add, having listened to what Rosa was sharing.
The only other thing I can think of is, and this was early on in my years in the ministry, working with the youth and the young men, especially. I didn't work with the females at all, but I think that's when they're first starting to mask the feelings and try and hide things. But no matter how much they seem like they want to do a knuckleheaded thing, they still need that support, and I think just giving them the opportunity, whether it's to be in a small group where they can express themselves more, or work on a small project. Sometimes it's the youngest guys, even among the older prisons. The youngest guys really want to get to the decorations and whatever they can do creatively to add to the decorations. And the Christmas trees and things are so common that it's not necessarily just our Catholic or Christian inmates. In fact, I think the only live tree that I remember coming in was our Wiccan volunteer a dozen years ago, brought in a live tree, so his guys were able to have that. But the guys will always pull the decorations together no matter what they are. We've gone through a lot of nativity sets, things that eventually have to be hot trashed if they break. But they'll put something together if they're given the opportunity, and as Father George said, if something's allowed and we can go ahead and make the time for it. Younger inmates appreciate it. Of course, the older inmates too. You've got a lot of guys on LWOP, life without parole, and they're kind of wondering, what's going to happen from 1 year. Is this another holiday that's going to go by for them without that chance to go to parole or whatever? So I think just spending the time, young or old, they need our time. So.
Mm-hmm. And going back to what you were talking about earlier, Bill, with calendars and cards, I want to. There's a few resources out there. The Salvation Army is one, and the American Rehabilitation Ministries, it's an evangelical group. They have good Christmas card programs. You have to pay a nominal amount of money for them. I think it's like $5 a box. But I order about 8,000 Christmas cards a year, and they're nice. They're nice Hallmark cards. But you have to do that. You almost have to think about doing it right after this Christmas for next year. You really have to do that well in advance, because by the time the orders go in and sit in the warehouse, you want to make sure that you got everything set up. And you also want to make sure I usually start giving these things out around Halloween, right after Halloween. Like in Target, all the Christmas decorations go up. That's when we start giving out the cards and the calendars, because the guys want to have a chance too to write the cards and get them out in time. But the thing that I've always found really strange is you think that men or women who are doing time would not want to be reminded about it by looking at a daily calendar, but it's actually quite the opposite. They love calendars. If you can get the kind of calendars that are big enough for people to write dates and information on, they find that really helpful. And you can order some that have nice pictures on them that kind of brighten up some drab spaces. That's the sort of thing that you need to rely on outside funding for. It's not inexpensive, but it's not overly expensive. We spend about $1,000 a year on calendars. We have 4,000 prisoners, but primarily I'm aiming at our death row population and our mainline guys who participate in the services. But this is something you can do ahead of time. You can order, you can go online and find places that print nice calendars and get them at a reasonable price. You want to do all this by the springtime, so you have it for the following year. Another resource is Living Faith Foundation. They're the people who produce the Living Faith devotional books. They also have a lot of things around Advent and Lent that are nice resources of prayer cards and there's Advent calendars and Lent calendars and different kinds of rosary prayers and all these different pamphlets that are free. And you just have to go to the Living Faith Foundation website and find out what's there. But again, this requires us to be proactively preparing this well ahead of time. So I'm looking at a couple questions here. One person writes, communication with staff, especially when planning for special services and events, is really critical. I find it's not enough to speak to a manager or director, but you need to talk to the floor staff on duty to let them know that a special event is occurring. And that's really important, I think, for all of us. Figuring out the politics of your particular institution and working with the people, the line staff. It's a matter of respect for one thing. You don't want to spring something on them. But if they're on board with you, they'll make it happen. If people are blindsided, they'll go out of their way to make sure it doesn't happen. So that's a good point about letting the staff know what we want to do well ahead of time, and working with staff to do these programs is important, both for us as both whether you're a chaplain hired or if you're a volunteer going in. And then another person writes, what would you recommend for the 4 Catholics on death row at OSP? I guess that's Oregon State Prison. This is an especially depressing time of year for them. I don't know, maybe, what do you think, Rosa? We're used to working with larger groups of death row inmates, but most prisons around the country, they're fairly small groups. Any thoughts on how you would answer Deborah's?
You know, the women, as I said, here where I am, there are only 21 women on death row. And I do have a weekly service, and they basically tell me what they can do and what they like to. And one of the things that the Catholic women are, movies is one of the things that are really very high into. They love, movies. I talk to them about Christmas carols, and they say, no, that's not for us. So they just cannot tell me. And so one of the things that the Catholic women, and and anyone is welcome, they do is that every Sunday morning they get up earlier and they have breakfast together, and I bring them videos, DVDs on scripture or the saints, or and basically they do programs on their own. They do courses, they do some kind of faith formation, and they discuss among themselves. And then when I go on Wednesday, they tell me what they did and what they agree with and the questions that they have. And that seems to be working for them, Yeah.
I would say anything that encourages some sort of camaraderie, some sort of communal activity is important. And death rows are different because in different states, but I know like in ours, most of the men are in individual cells, and there's not really a lot of direct contact unless they go out to the yard. But we do have religious services, and I know this time of year it's really important for the guys who do participate, whether they're Christian or not, it doesn't matter. Have something available during that time to mark the holiday really makes a big difference for them. What do you think, Bill? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I find in our isolation units, whether it's the standalone or in fact we have had one guy at New Folsom from death row. He feels very isolated, of course, because he's the only one. So even if he's got communication down the tier, it's I noticed if his materials ever get taken away, he would really be upset and needing something to read, something to kind of keep himself busy with. So yeah, the more contact they can have, and be sensitive if they're not having contact with each other because they're in one of these isolation units, just to somehow provide the contact, either bring more volunteers out there or something so that they can have somebody to talk to. It's not like the guards are going to have time to stand there and talk with everybody. And there's more mental health assistance lately, but not all of them want to sign up to see a clinician about something. So just informally being able to talk, whatever. talk whatever they're available for.
In connection with it, but one of the things that has been happening the last couple of years here at the Women's Institution, organized by Prison Fellowship, and is bringing the families, the children of these women, certain women that were able to come, to come, and have the women wrap up the gifts and give them to their own children, and spending the day with the children. I mean, we had a celebration last Friday, and the whole institution went, really cooperative on it. A lot of women decorated the visiting room. They spent time painting and decorating it, making it really very welcoming for children. And then Prison Fellowship brought a whole bunch of gifts, and the women who were expecting their children to come picked the gifts for their children and wrapped them up. And then on Friday when they came, they were beautiful family reunions there. Prison Fellowship provided also lunch and popcorn for everybody. They had the jumping house for the kids, and it was a beautiful, beautiful day. Now there were a number of women, because in my end in the chapel, I was, the women came to the chapel first, and as the families were coming, they were called to the visiting, and I think there were 20-some women that were expecting their families, and the families couldn't make it. And I was wondering if this is something that maybe we can work with the parishes at the local level. If there is, if the family, the churches can provide help, so these families can visit, these children can visit their mothers or their fathers during the holidays, because that makes a whole difference in the world for those people who are incarcerated. Helping with transportation, or that would be really, really helpful, I think.
That's a good idea. I'm also aware my voice is not coming across too well on this. I don't know what the problem is. It might be my computer. Hopefully you can at least hear what I'm saying. One of the things you both mentioned, I think, has to do with the ability this time of year, the opportunity to do ecumenical services, to kind of bring the Christian communities together. We have, on Christmas Eve, we always have a Mass at San Quentin, but on Christmas Day, we have a non-denominational service in our chapel. For some reason, our Protestant chaplain doesn't do Christmas services, so it kind of makes it more enticing for the guys who go to the Protestant services to join us for fellowship. But I think it's a real opportunity to kind of, again, build community and encourage the prisoners to get out of their usual divisions, especially when it comes to religion. You find that the case? Was that the case at your place, Bill?
Yeah, whatever they can get to, whether it's, the Catholics supporting something that, all the other faiths would like to come to, or encouraging our guys, if there is a Protestant service that, they can sign up for, to do something. Our Kairos group is great at that, having special services around Thanksgiving and Christmas, because they have a lot of prayer meetings anyway. So if they can, have a time where they can invite extra people to come to what they would call a reunion, that it really helps to get people into those larger groups and introduce them more to the guys that are coming more often to chapel, and kind of lets them know that this is a normal group that they can start affiliating with, and the holidays are a good time for that. Mentioning getting families together, and of course, the Get on the Bus program helps around the Mother's and Father's Days. And that's one way that our parish really likes to get involved too, because they're asked to help. They're close enough to the prison, they're asked to help with putting together a little meal or something as the bus comes in before they go on the prison. They can do that. And then again, with something like getting the Christmas cards or even Mother's Day cards, Knights of Columbus is sometimes a good group that they're really busy activity-wise, so you might not get as many on-site volunteers from them, but the funding, I think, with some of those parish groups comes fairly easily, and they're looking for ways to help out in a monetary way. So that might be a good source for getting Christmas cards or putting together something to help get on the bus or some other group. So.
Along those lines, I think another thing is encouraging our parishes to mention prisoners and their families during the Mass and the intentions, just to keep people aware that that people are in prison and the holidays are difficult for them. I'm also thinking that as we're coming toward the end of our time, if there's anybody who's watching, participating right now, who has ideas or practices that we haven't addressed, I'd appreciate you sharing with them. You can do that via the chat or the question and answer piece, just to make sure that we get as many ideas out there as possible, because there's really so many different ways to be creative this time of year in how we approach the holidays and the services that we provide for the prisoners and their families. So anything to add on that topic, Rosa?
I'm not sure. As I said, that the liturgical time, gives us a lot of opportunities for this time of the year, and those are great resources for us to yeah. And of course, every institution is different. But yes, I think involving the Christian community, something that brings a lot of people, and that I haven't done a whole lot of it and working on it right now, is the parishes. They have wonderful choirs, and they practice, and they do a great job when it comes to Christmas time. And so inviting those choirs to come and give concerts in the institutions when they are not far from, and that would be something that, as I said, right now I'm working on it. I'm in contact with some. It's not going to happen this year, but I'm going to bring it for next year, because I know it brings a lot of people when they want to see someone, different people, different performances. And so that kind of calls the attention and brings a lot of good spirit to the institution.
Something you had mentioned earlier, Rosa, had to celebrating the holidays with prisoners from different cultural backgrounds, especially like we had a nice bilingual celebration of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And we also always do something special on the Feast of the Three Kings. We're also, this year, we're doing a Sabunga B, I say that right, celebration for our Filipino community.
Ah.
And so depending on where you are, I mean, you
right.
We have so many people from so many different traditions, but I think it's important to recognize them and to facilitate them, the guys and women who come from that tradition, to share it, to celebrate, but also to share it with people from outside their culture so they can learn about it as well. So there's so many different expressions of the holidays out there that, and depending on where you are and what your resources are, it's good to recognize and celebrate them. So we have the, are there any other groups that you've, besides the Spanish speakers or the Filipinos, that you've done Christmas projects with over the years?
We don't have great, we don't have a lot of, enough large minority groups aside from the Hispanic at our institution. Within the Protestant community, there is quite a large African American, and sometimes they do a lot of kind of gospel music, and everybody is invited to their concerts or their prayer time, and they are specifically designed for this time of the year as well, so that they bring a lot of joy to the institution as well. Mm-hmm.
We celebrate Kwanzaa actually in the Catholic chapel, and it's a nice bridge between Christmas and New Year's, and it's a very community-focused celebration of African American culture and history, but it's also universal. So the principles are universal principles, and we get a lot of really good participation that way as well. So if you don't do Kwanzaa, you might look into finding a way to incorporate that. Any other, what about you, Bill? Any other?
The only other thing I can think of is just, making room for, other expressions even beyond the season. I had one of my Catholic clerks was Asian, and he would make sure that the Buddhists had time, as we got towards the end of January to make sure that, Chinese New Year was able to be celebrated. And the chapel's a good place for some of those things. We may not find it as close to our, religious expression, but just for a group that needs a place, and since we've had a larger Buddhist ministry there in recent years, they kind of take care of everything. We just need to make sure that the schedule in the chapel is available so that something like that can happen if that's going to be a special feast day for them or whatever.
Yeah. So whether it's Buddhist holidays or Three Kings or Guadalupe or Kwanzaa or Sabungabi or any number of things, it's interesting how so many of the different religious traditions have celebrations this time of year. So it's a wonderful opportunity for interfaith celebration and community building.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Something that I have not explored yet, but I'm thinking, in many parishes they have maybe a day of reflection, the last day of the year, and then have some kind of prayer service to welcome the new year. I think it's an opportunity that sometimes I feel that I have missed, that I'm thinking of how to rekindle it, because when it comes to the church, it's not a day of obligation sometimes, right? And so it might be in the middle of the week, but if we have the time and the resources, having a nice kind of closing of the year, and with asking for forgiveness or kind of examining what went through the year and how we can plan the year, especially there are some younger people, inmates that are kind of a little bit lost, and kind of helping them a little bit to, okay, what is your life going? What did I do this year? What am I happy about? What did I accomplish that I feel good about it? And then what should I do? Because let's face it, there are, especially here at the women's institutions, there are many opportunities for formation, for learning, and in all aspects, for learning trades, for exercising, for you name it. And sometimes there are people who just don't take those opportunities. They are kind of lost a little bit. And so I think, some of these kind of we can call it a day of reflection, or we can call it, as an afternoon of reflection, whatever it is, and then how we welcome the new year. How can we make it more profitable, spiritually, physically, emotionally, and all of that might be a good idea too.
Yeah. I just have a message from Margie Seiler, who says that the jail where she volunteers, they're allowed to distribute a pamphlet called Stop, Drop, and Pray. So I haven't heard of that particular pamphlet, but it sounds good. I think the idea of any spiritual resources this time of year really are valuable to hand out, because the guys and the women are looking for something. And I think too that it's focusing on the spiritual quality aspect of what the season's all about. Like, I really emphasize Advent at our place, and we don't rush into decorating Christmas too early, so the guys have a chance to kind of really prepare themselves emotionally and spiritually for the holiday. And if the focus is on that and on the gospel, as you were saying, Bill, then it kind of takes away from sort of the sentimentality of the commercialized Christmas out here that and people feel like they're missing out on that. It's one way to help, I think, to focus on the richness of our tradition and the spirituality. And again, reminding people that Christmas doesn't end on the 25th of December, it actually begins. Yeah, right. It's a season. And so it takes away from that sort of just focusing on one day, and it opens it up to a time of spiritual growth. So I think, as you're saying, Rosa, having the opportunity for retreat time or days of reflection or anything brings people together in a more contemplative, thoughtful way is a good way to use the time we have. So any last words before we wrap this up from either you, Bill, or from Rosa?
I think, as you just mentioned, using the strength of our liturgical movements, just reminding them. And we have a lot of the Protestant clerks that like to help us set up for our services, for the Mass or whatever. And reminding them, yeah, this is going to stay violet. This color, we don't go into the Christmas colors until Christmas Day. And then, that's a season. That's, at least till Epiphany or beyond that. And it helps them to understand and get through the season, gets them ready for other seasons of the year too. So I think the liturgy always helps.
Great.
Yeah. For me, what I'm finding important is to bring the inmates into the conversation, not for me to plan things, but what can we do about this or about that? And I find it very helpful because they know what they need, they know what they like, but it also helped me to know how to plan it and what are the politics and the do's and don'ts of the institution, so those programs or those activities can really happen. And so listening to them and bringing them into the conversation and also giving the chance to everybody to participate, not just the old timers that sometimes they like to do things their way, but also bringing, having everybody a say and going by that. I find it helpful, yeah. And also, thinking about what are the resources that are available in the local churches, the local communities that I can tap into. And I'm still exploring some of this. But I find that there are many people that are more willing that I was, that I'm thinking of. And sometimes, one volunteer leads to another, and people are really willing to donate for materials and movies or books or whatever that is. They are very willing to make a difference in the inmates' lives.
Yes. Well, I think that's a really important note to end on, and that you're bringing up, Rosa, is that really what we need to do starting is ask them what they need. Because the men and women we work with, they know, and it's empowering for them to do that. And also, the resources are out there. I would recommend that you visit our website, catholicprisonministries.org, go to resources, and a number of the different our partners and have resources that are very useful this time of year. You can access, many of them are free. Again, it requires planning ahead, so you may not have to get this done by this Christmas, but it's never too early to start preparing for the following year. But I would definitely recommend you use our website, the resources there, for planning your holiday celebrations, and avail yourself of whatever's out there, whether it's cards, calendars, literature, rosaries, anything. And again, I would want to emphasize Keeping Hope. The book put out by Dismas Ministries is a wonderful resource this time of year, so please check that out as well. That's in our website under resources, media, and then go to books, and it'll take you there. As we're coming up to the end, I just want to again thank Deacon Bill and Rosa for your work, your wonderful colleagues to work with, and wish you all blessings on this season as you with the people that you're engaged with, your families as well as the prisoners. And for all of our listeners, I wish you a very blessed Christmas season coming up. And we will have a program in January, although we haven't settled on a topic or a title yet, but we will send that information out as soon as possible as to what our January webinar will be. So be looking for an email with a link to that. And feel free to contact us if you email me at Catholic Prison Ministries, and if you have suggestions for either webinars or things that we didn't cover today that you think need to be mentioned. So again, thank you both, and thank you all for joining us. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father George. Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you.